May I speak in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Please be seated. And he told them a parable, saying, the land of a rich man was very productive. Blessings to you and your families on this beautiful Sunday morning. Unfortunately, Anna Marie tested positive for COVID and is at home resting and quarantining. We wish her a speedy recovery. The first conversation I had yesterday morning was about winning the lottery. Carol mentioned that someone won over $1 billion. $1 billion, at least for me, is an unimaginable sum. And so we speculated what we might do with that kind of windfall. We agreed that we would first start a philanthropic foundation, most likely focusing on homelessness and those who live on the margins of our society, which is where my wife focuses her attention with her work. We would add a solar system, of course, to our new home and build out our basement. We would hire a full-time nanny for Patrick and Rachel and help them complete their remodeling. And finally, I said to Carol, she could buy that Tesla she's been thinking about. Our plans were not the most imaginative. And so what would you do if you won the lottery or came into a bonanza that exceeded your expectations and your needs? It's an interesting question. Our answer tells us something about ourselves, what we value, and what we hold most dear and most precious. I've never experienced working at a startup with the prospect of a large IPO, but I have friends who did. My first office mate was an early employee of a company that later went public, and he cashed out. He retired from technology, well-deserved as far as I'm concerned, and pursued his passions, bicycle racing and fast, expensive cars. Later, he decided to pursue a teaching credential and ended up teaching physics at a public high school. He successfully engaged his students, especially on days when he drove to class in his McLaren Sportster, and used it as a prop for his physics lessons. Unfortunately, he passed away far too early in a boating accident. His wife, who was also active in various local environmental movements, started a small foundation in his and their daughter's name. I can't think of a better way to give back to society. Today's gospel reading is one of several that focus on wealth and how we use wealth. Jesus is teaching a large crowd, and someone comes up to him and asks him to inject himself and adjudicate an inheritance dispute. The petitioner knew the futility of his request, and Jesus' response reflects that reality, namely that an itinerant preacher has no standing in court, but he does have authority to teach. And so Jesus uses the case as an object lesson. The land of a rich man was very productive, and he began reasoning with himself, saying, "What shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops?" We see drama play out constantly with the ultra-rich. What should I do with my wealth? I know, I'll buy Twitter and make more money. I'll buy an island and make it my private sanctuary. I'll invest in rockets so that I can travel into space. Or I'll buy a sports team or endow an already over-endowed university so I can get my name on a building. And it goes on and on. Jesus teaches a cautionary tale that challenges this logic. When the rich man in the parable concludes, "This is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have many goods. So take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry.'" But life sometimes throws curveballs and well-laid plans fall apart. Jesus tells the crowd that God called out the man and his folly. "You fool, this very night your soul is required of you." Barns stuffed to capacity will be torn down and new ones erected in their place and filled with even more. But who will enjoy this abundance? God's response in this parable is abrupt. It's unexpected. In human terms, the rich man's plan reflects an all too human response. It also demonstrates the wisdom of the prosperity gospel. The man was already wealthy beyond all imagination. His good fortune only made him richer. He plans a life of leisure, a life he already lives and forgets. He forgets about his mortality. He doesn't consider the subsistence farmers who worked his fields, which helped him become even wealthier. And like all mortals, his soul is required of him. Later in the chapter, Jesus tells his audience not to worry about your life as to what you will eat, and which of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to his lifespan. It is important to remember who Jesus was targeting with this lesson. Luke tells us that he was speaking to his disciples, but the real audience is the wealthy that showed up to listen to him. For example, subsistence farmers are not worried about family inheritances. They have none. Also, he's not talking to the poor. The disciples left everything to follow Jesus. They rely on benefactors like Martha and Mary and Lazarus. I keep thinking about another interaction Jesus has with a rich man who is also called a ruler. He obeys the commandments, and Jesus, the ruler tells Jesus that he has followed the commandments since he was young. So Jesus puts an entire test to him and ups the ante and explains what might be hindering him. He tells him, sell all that you possess and distribute it to the poor. When the ruler hears this, Luke says he becomes very sad because he had many possessions. These lessons leave us wondering what hinders us from following Jesus' footsteps. Each of us faces our own temptations and our own weaknesses. Building bigger barns is not the answer to living a better life. And so what do we do? When you get a quiet moment, ask yourself how you would respond to Jesus' parable of the rich man. You might consider how the great commandment to love God and to love neighbor fits into your understanding. I don't think we should sell all of our possessions and distribute the proceeds to the poor, but we must do something. We must do something lest we earn the title, you fool. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.